All right, guys. So when we talk about the stock market and how we feel it's going to be doing in the future, we kind of use comparisons to animals. Okay. If you are bullish, that means you think that the market is going to go up. You feel good about the economy. Okay. However, if you don't feel like the economy is doing well, you feel like stock prices are going to go down, then you would be bearish. Okay. This is usually the terms that we use in finance to describe how we feel about the current marketplace. Now, when it comes to monetary policy, however, they also use comparisons to animals, right? So you have the dove and you have the hawk. The dove is said to like low interest rates and is not that concerned about inflation, in the sense that they don't see the negative effects of inflation being more important than other indicators such as low unemployment. Hawks, on the other hand, are very wary of inflation. Okay. And in order to keep inflation under control, they like to have higher interest rates in order to not have too much money circulating in the economy at one time. Now, Janet Yellen, who is Biden's Treasury Secretary pick, we haven't talked about her much, but she is a dove. Okay. So she cited her dovish beliefs in having a low interest rate environment as reasons why we should spend, and we should spend big. However, the question is, with the amount of spending that we've done over the last year or so, will inflation catch up to us? Now, over the last, 10 years or so, since the financial crisis, inflation has been relatively tame. I think it's been around 2% or lower than 2%. That's about where it is historically, where it's supposed to be. However, a lot of people are saying that our reckless spending will eventually catch up to us, but she doesn't seem to be concerned about it. And we've seen what Biden's policies, particularly the minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage. Janet Yellen believes that this is good policy because she thinks that, again, it's going to help put more money back into consumers' hands. She is pushing full steam ahead with Joe Biden's radical economic agenda. However, it looks like our own nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, along with Tim Scott and the markets, are responding negatively to this radical agenda. But before we get into that, my name is Greg Foreman and you're watching A Black Conservative Perspective. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share. A Black Conservative Perspective, aka a leftist worst nightmare. You can also follow me on Twitter at GForemanBCP. Let's get it. All right, guys. So the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan entity, came out and said that Biden's proposal to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour could kill up to 3.7 million jobs, according to their estimates. Now, this is a big deal, guys, because, again, this is nonpartisan. This isn't coming from the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute or some institute like that. This is coming from the Congressional Budget Office, and their data is used and their studies are used a lot when it comes to making decisions about which policies we should pursue moving forward. So this is kind of a big deal for them to come out here and say this. So let's read a little bit more into it. And this was written a few days ago before Biden came in. So President-elect Joe Biden's proposal to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour could kill up to 3.7 million jobs, the Congressional Budget Office estimated. The CBO said that some of the higher earnings from the $15 minimum wage could be offset by higher rates of joblessness. The report found that 1.3 million workers who would typically be employed would be without jobs in an average week in 2025. A new federal minimum wage would also increase the pay of 17 million workers in an average week in 2025. The increase in earnings will mostly affect low-income families, while a loss of business will affect higher income families. Families below the poverty line would receive an additional $8 billion in real income in 2025, while families above the poverty line would lose $16 billion in real income. Biden detailed his coronavirus relief package last week, which included raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour. So let's back up here. Families below the poverty line will receive an additional $8 billion in real income in 2025, while families above the poverty line would lose $16 billion in real income. I think that's a big deal, because what that shows is that even if you raise the minimum wage and you take the liberal argument that, you know, it's going to bring a lot of people out of poverty, the question is that $8 billion to get people out of poverty worth losing the $16 billion for people that are not in poverty? I think the answer to that question really does depend on political ideology. So, quote, no one working 40 hours a week would still be below the poverty line, he said. People telling me that it's going to be hard to pass. Florida just passed it, as divided as that state is. They just passed it. The rest of the country is ready to move as well. The proposal, however, has garnered pushback from Republicans, particularly Tim Scott. He pressed Janet Yellen on this issue. I'm going to play her response to his question so you can get an idea of her argument regarding the raising the minimum wage.
How do we grapple with parts of this package that really are philosophical in nature and denies the practical reality that comes from it?
Well, Senator, I appreciate that question. You know, President-elect Biden has proposed raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, because right now we have millions of American workers who are putting their lives on the line to keep their communities functioning, and sometimes even working multiple jobs aren't earning enough to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. And they're suffering in countless ways, especially during this pandemic, and really struggling to get by. And raising the minimum wage would really help many of those workers. And that's the reason for doing it. Now, in terms of potential job loss, there's now a large economics literature on this, and much of it suggests that the raising minimum wages, this is what researchers often look at what happens when one state raises its minimum wage and a neighboring state leaves it alone, to see how businesses fare in the two different places with different treatments. And the findings are that the job loss is very minimal, if anything. So I think that the likely impact on jobs is minimal. That's my reading of the research. And of course, I agree with you, small businesses are struggling, and it's critical to help those businesses.
All right, guys. So you heard Janet Yellen's rebuttal to Tim Scott, asking her about the CBO report, and basically her rebuttal is that there's studies that show that you know, when you look at two states and one raising the minimum wage and then one keeping it the same, that there's minimum job loss. Now, she is right about that. Obviously, she is the Treasury Secretary, so she knows her stuff. However, I would question her in regards to what this will look like in the Midwest, right, where all across large swaths of the country, where the price of living is a lot lower. I am skeptical of how this is going to affect rural communities and businesses in rural areas of the country, particularly those that have large swaths of rural communities. And this is why my default position on minimum wage is really that it is a state issue. I mean, basically the same thing that Trump said during the debate when asked about minimum wage, is that it really comes down to the state, in my opinion. I don't think the federal government has any business telling South Dakota, you know, how much their minimum wage should be. If Florida wants to change that minimum wage to $15 an hour, great. If California wants to do that, great. If New York wants to do that, great. But if, you know, North Dakota, South Dakota wants to keep it at $7.25, it is what it is. Matter of fact, I don't think that should be a federal minimum wage at all. I think that should solely be determined by the state, right? I don't think it's a federal issue at all, to be quite honest with you. Now, does that mean I'm against the minimum wage? I'm not against it. I'm just saying that ideally a minimum wage stays as a state issue. So that's really